I'm following very nicely on Lorna's talk because I'm doing more deconstructing type activities on the concept of gender binary. And what I'm going to do in my rather prickly masculine academic way, please bear with me throughout this because I think I'm saying a lot of the same stuff everybody else is saying, just from another angle. So I'm going to take an anthropological approach, cross-cultural materials to understand what might be going on with the sensation or the understanding of psychedelics as a feminine type spirit. So, in cosmopolitan, meaning Western world or Northern Hemisphere, there's a lot of terms for this. They're very difficult to try to get one that really captures everything. I tend towards cosmopolitan. We often find this dialogue or these talking about psychedelics as feminine spirits, as Lorna has talked about. And you do find this cross-culturally, but masculine and the feminine cross-culturally are not unified. So what's going on there? If this is a feminine spirit, shouldn't it manifest with those aspects if it was ontologically condensed? Shouldn't it do that, then cross these gender boundaries along the way? But it doesn't. So this requires some understanding, perhaps explanation. I think this is related to aspects in Jung about the shadow and how the shadow interplays with these cultural artifacts of deciding what is masculine and feminine. And ultimately, that psychedelics lay bare the cultural filters and approach us into the Jungian shadows and lays bare these filters of the masculine and feminine, as it does as well the boundaries between normal and altered states of consciousness. So, what am I talking about? In cosmopolitan stuff, I did a lot of online research on psychedelic forums, several years of that actually. One of the people from one of those forums is secretly in this room. But there was a lot of discourse about what the feminine was in the psychedelic context. And these are things: nurturing, love, balance, psychotherapeutic and spiritual development, unconditional love. These things were associated as feminine aspects. And I think all of us from a cosmopolitan point of view do feel that same vibe. Not necessarily completely, but there's that. Now, you go to, for example, Amazonian cultures, the psychedelic experience has the aspects of creating reality. So creation, manufacturing, supernatural warfare, divination of crime and punishment for crimes, negotiation with spirits, and these things are feminine. Kind of different vibe going on there, and this is dipping into some of the dark feminine aspects that Tim spoke about as well. So these are going on. Let's see. Sherry Ortner, an anthropologist, noted that one thing you can find everywhere is that women tend to be subjugated in all societies, and that reproduction puts the feminine in the role of nature. And this is the perception of nature as being feminine, and this is pretty well patterned across cultures, as you can see through these cultural artifacts. So it's a little bit vibey, or odd. The feminine expressed as nature. Because men are free from the rigors of pregnancy, childbirth, child care, they're more free to do culture. And culture is something we do. We manufacture, we create. And therefore men are of a cultural bent, whereas women are of a natural bent. And this is an idea that has plugged along for quite a while in the anthropological literature. Another researcher, author named Gilmore, kind of refined this and said women were more chthonic. Chthonic means arising from itself. They're just there. They are their own creation, including this natural aspect, and that the feminine can be vague and expansive. Whereas men are cultural artifacts. They must act constantly to redefine themselves, and this is a constant process of refinement. So it's like sharpening an edge. You keep taking off the little bits. This is masculine, this is masculine, this is not. And because of this, the feminine becomes the things, the vague, expansive aspects that are reduced from the masculine. So there's this co-creation. I think it's really important to realize this is not the men driving the creation of women, or the masculine driving the creation of feminine, nor feminine driving the creation of masculine, but it is a co-negotiated space where within a culture, the masculine and the feminine will be defined. Now, just the other point, this is the cultural masculine. We've been doing this a really long time. I work in schools, and young boys draw penises everywhere. I mean, it's just shocking. So that's the cultural masculine versus the vague, misty, undefined, and natural feminine. So my slides tend to be more in the comedic as opposed to the informative. So of course I made these are cartoons. These are straw argument images, but just to nail down the points I'm making. Now, Goody and Buckley re-emphasize that it's accepting reproduction, childbirth and feeding of the children, which are obviously feminine, and you can't avoid that. There's no hard, fast universals of what is male and female. You can't say this type of thing is universally human, feminine. You go around the world and you'll find different cultures that do things differently. So, what we have here, pictures of boundary crossing. That's a man, that's a man, that's feminine spirit. And again, it's slightly cartoony, but across the world, different aspects of the human experience can be described as either masculine or feminine. Margaret Mead was famous for describing the Chambuli, who have almost completely diametrically opposed gender patterns or gender roles from the European and American. And though he's not Chambuli, I can't remember the name of that group, where the men stand up with lots of makeup and stand around waiting for the women to pick them, and they kind of dance. Pick me, I'm the pretty one, pick me. And the women are like, can you dance? And it's lovely. I love seeing that. It shows the flexibility of humans. We are very elastic species. And Gutman, like I said before, the only universal we find is that the masculine and the feminine are co-created. In a way, it's like, I like to use my hands, so this is hard. There's a pie of things humans have to do to get a by, to make society work. It's this big round pie, and we go, I guess I'll cut it in half that way. Maybe we'll cut it in half that way, or we'll cut it into 8 slices, but you can have a couple from over here and here. So there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done for the human animal to exist in a cultural context as a social animal. We can't all do all the jobs. If everybody had to do everything, we'd be perpetually exhausted. So it's a way of dividing labor, but the rules of dividing that labor, again, are very flexible. So, shadowy stuff. Becker, how am I doing on time? Oh, I'm flying through. Okay. It'll be all right. So, Becker spoke very much about fear of death leading to the denigration of the natural, which, as we've said, has been applied pretty generally to the feminine, and raising the cultural, the masculine. And my brain is pinging all over the place. I can't remember who was the one who said it. This is the idea of having the material wealth gathered and passed on to your offspring from the male line. It's this idea, I built something, I'm going to pass it on. And this is an idea of immortality, a form of immortality. So there's these immortality games that males, not the masculine, but males seem to be doing. And it's that fear of death, the natural, women menstruating, producing blood on a periodic basis. And, oh my God, we can't have you in ritual, you scare us. There's death going on here. We want to be immortal. And, you know, all over the place. And this is quite astonishing that women might withdraw from society for a period while they're having their menstruation. And sometimes it works to their benefit because they don't have to carry everything in the culture anymore. The guys have to do something for themselves for a week or two. But it's still, and it's exclusion. And exclusion is not a nice thing, even if it gives you a break. Think about prison. Now, so we're the culturally sanctioned performative behaviors and normative presentation of female bodies. So women are this, they represent death. That's another sort of performance. So masculinity and femininity is at base a performance. And this is by Butler. I'm sorry, I'm digging into the bit Timmy did. And so I'm drifting a bit because this is his area on there. He co-authored this article with me.
Where is he?
Where is Timmy? Why? Go get him. He gave a speak about talk about Lacan earlier, and so I don't know where he is. I asked him to come up and help me, and he refused. Okay. So, how does this material get embedded and reified as cultural material? So, we can have these ideas, but how does it suddenly everybody do them, believe that there's something real about them, and that there's kind of these boundaries you can't bang out of? And Geertz, Clifford Geertz, probably the only readable writer in anthropology, said that this is reinforced by religion, primarily. Religion, he says, signifies or teaches us the appropriate moods and motivations of a culture. This is how you should think. This is how you should feel. This is the ideal way you act as a cultural member. Now, all of us vary from that ideal. This woman who loves Jesus, she's not a good Christian, obviously, because her point of view is very different from a Christian point of view. She varies, but there's that mood and motivation. She's taken on those general ideas about what is correct in society, caring, loving, those types of things, which I do feel from the video. But these moods and motivations are actually modeled as the ideal man. Women are allowed to not quite have to do it, because we accept that there's a difference between men and women, and lots of things have to be done, but there's this ideal, the masculine ideal, which is the cultural reproduction aspects. Now, everything outside of the ideal man is a type of sin or transgression, including aspects of the feminine in a religious context. Marvin Harris, an old cultural materialist anthropologist, would say, yet among these excluded aspects, we have to tolerate some because they are important to the functioning of society. So it may not be ideal in a particular society to be nurturing, but we need nurturing because children need it to survive. The wounded and the ill need nurturing. It has to be. So it may not be ideal, but we will accept it. So we tolerate them. These are tended to be relegated to women who are not held to the same standards of social discourse as men, because we're constantly refining ourselves, cutting that edge, honing, as I said before. I'll get to that idea in a second. And this, I think, moving into the Jungian aspects, the shadow that I've been representing here for quite a while, this is a place, it's a sociocultural bridge into the collective shadow, not the individual shadow, but the collective shadow, the societal shadow, as defined by the unique cultural expectations of each individual society. So, I believe, talk about the shadow. Everybody understand the Jungian shadow? It's like we are all everything, we're capable of everything, but somehow we learn, don't be that, boys don't cry. You know, these types of things. And so we put that down there. People can do everything. I can be an axe murderer, but it's a pretty bad idea to do that in this culture. I put it down there. As things are taken from the ideal and this cultural level, I think we have cultural models as well, as opposed to individual, socially developed models, because culture has this unified or collective consciousness thing. Aspects of gender, and particularly the feminine, get dipped a little bit in that shadow. We're not really supposed to go there. Sometimes we have to. And as we navigate that shadow space and that understanding that some of us are, or all of us can kind of have that, but we blocked it out. Cheater and Sullivan do this really interesting sort of research independently, and I think one together, about honorary men. And these are really kind of cool figures. These are generally postmenopausal women who have achieved enough power to be accepted as men and can get immense power from it, and quite a lot of power to intimidate others. And so they're only allowed to maintain that power as long as they don't undermine the overall nature of the patriarchy. Right? So I'm thinking right now Margaret Thatcher, but also part of that regulation and that don't undermine the patriarchy is these discourses. As soon as a woman starts lecturing at you like I am, she's pushy. There's something wrong with her. She's a little bit aggressive. She's a bitch. These types of discourses happen. Those are control mechanisms. You can take this role. We'll accept you as one of us, but only honorarily so. We won't give you all the power. And the power, I believe, is very real. The Munduruku is an Amazonian tribe. They know the men have these flutes and they do this sort of rituals with these flutes, and the women aren't even allowed to look at them. They have to go hide when the rituals happen. But they know it's because they stole them from the women. Women had all the power. Men had to make all the food. That's why they have flat palms. It's a sign of the time when they're terrified the women will get those flutes back again, so they can't even look at it. They know there's power in the women when they get the stuff. More power than they have. It's a real fear. Also, Mircea Eliade talks about gender crossing as a source of power. Transvestism is common in shamanic practices, that going from one to the other. Boundary breaking. So it's not an impossible thing, but it makes you different. And power is derived from that. And this isn't just in indigenous societies. I'm really fascinated that in our presentation, or our understanding of, say, Vikings as rather kind of masculine culture, right? They did have female warriors. I think that's really super cool. But Odin was the big guy because he did all the women's stuff. He was a midwife. He was an herbalist. He was transgendered. And that's why Odin is the All-Father. That's where everything comes from. He has the magics of both men and women. Nobody else does. And his counterpoint, the bad guy, Loki, he, as a joke, turned into a female, got pregnant, gave birth. So, the positive and the negative, the trickster and the all-father, all coming together through this transgendered vibe. So there's an encoded religious aspect of power coming from crossing boundaries and crossing gender. And in a way, the techniques of ecstasy, which talks about, then this can be drumming, this can be meditation, this can be whatever it does to get us into these states. And he felt the non-psychedelic methods were the real ones, and psychedelics were because he forgot how to do it right. But these techniques of ecstasy are crossing the boundary in a psychological space as opposed to a gender space. So there's this relationship, boundary crossing relationship. And it's crossing into that shadow. There's a clear aspect of dealing with the stuff you haven't dealt with, that healing, that integration, getting into that shadow. So, as I love Venus figurines. These are the most beautiful women in the world up there. Have you seen the Nina Paley animations of these? They're all dancing. It's fantastic. Here's where I go into the, I'm going to read a bit more because this is where I get sort of poetic, I think. So as we dip into that collective shadow that manifests as feminine, it shows us what we value in a society through the stark relief of presenting what we dismiss. The psychedelic feminine is a bridge to the shadow from which arbitrary boundaries of culture can be perceived and normality and rationality redefined. In this context, the feminine acts as a redresser of social imbalance. Nobody is born gendered. These are categories loosely draped upon sex and both culturally contextual and fluid, no firm boundary, cross-culturally. These identities are developed through a lifelong developmental and socializing process that by necessity excises aspects of the whole person to fit within the narrow categories defined by society into which one is born. And the psychedelic experience allows us to review that process and see the rules of society as arbitrary in and of themselves and malleable. Instead of merely accepting culture as inscribed in stone, one can begin to analyze it at an abstract level and see how that which is excised could be instead integrated as perfectly acceptable aspects of the self, which become valuable in changing contexts, creating paths towards greater integration and wholeness. So the feminine is a complex concept that on the world stage has only a very small set of shared characteristics, body parts, and reproductive roles, basically. Beyond this, the feminine is vast, changeable, and contextually constructed, most effectively by its contrast with a similarly complex and contextual masculine. So, when we hear or read people describing psychedelics as feminine spirits, we naturally envision our own model of femininity. So we pull that in. Yet, we must be very careful about our assumptions. The feminine is unpredictable, dangerous, and erotic, and can trap this poor dude if he took the wax out of his ear. But it's not because of any innate quality, but because it's the manifestation of what we have culturally enshadowed. That is the danger. As similarities and differences between aliens, fairies, elves, and angels attest, it is clear that anomalous experience, particularly that of numinous quality, is cloaked in cultural trappings of the observer. This is not to argue the ontological status of such entities, but rather to make clear that as we enter a state of loosened associations, which makes such experiences increasingly likely, one is nevertheless obligated to process these experiences or encounters through their cognitive and cultural filters. So, this is very abstract, very academic, but I think this really does have on-the-ground political and important aspects. As we enter a realm right now where gender is something we're beginning to find fluid, play with, the feminism has opened up aspects and roles to women, one might ask, and somebody has asked, are we feminizing the men in our cultures? And like I said, these are boxes that we put things in, so you can't feminize males. Whatever we define as masculine is masculine. So it's just changing the roles of what's in those boxes. So, but what's happening as we do this, I think, we have to be really careful of the bigger picture. Because as very well-educated, engaged, and affluent in a way, women are becoming more likely to go into masculine fields. There are still fields that are considered feminine, even though men are entering them. Academic education versus secondary education. One is masculine, the other is feminine. Care work, feminine. They don't get the social clout and pay of masculine roles. But these are becoming not masculine and feminine, but they are becoming class. And roles of care and nurturing are disproportionately becoming roles that minorities play for affluent majorities. Majority is a weird word, isn't it? And so as we are throwing out the gender game and looking at it as its abstract and contextual self, we need to be really aware of what's happening in terms of race and class while we do it. Thank you very much.